Yeah, hi, thank you, Stefan. I assume that everyone's there in person. I'm actually on campus myself. I'm in the Math and Science building, which is where the Disabilities and Computing program is housed. And our job is to ensure that people with disabilities have access to digital environments, whether that be learning management systems and instructional material, to public resources like public websites like the DGSOM site, making sure that people with disabilities who use assistive technology are able to access these environments. So we're going to talk to you today about kind of the standards that UCLA uses around digital accessibility, some of the cultural issues of disability, and then in the second half, Chris Patterson, who's our technical lead, is going to walk you through some of the best practices to use while using the WYSIWYG editor inside the new editing environment. So I'm going to fire up the deck and we'll get started. All right, you can see our learning pathway today. We're going to start with the introduction. Then we're going to move into the why of accessibility. Carol Ann's going to walk you through some of the cultural issues around disability and accessibility. I'm going to talk to you about the what of accessibility. How do we define accessibility, as well as some of the laws around accessibility that UCLA is under. And then Sal Santa Anna, who's our testing lead at the DCP, is going to show you how a screen reader navigates a web page. It's a very different experience than how you and I might use a web page, which is very visual. So it's an auditory-based navigation of a web page. And then we're not going to do the testing website. We're actually going to do we're going to just flip into the other deck, which is going to be focused on Chris Patterson showing you the actual WYSIWYG environment and some of the best practices in there. So here in this deck, we see a man named Stephen Wiltshire. I like to kind of frame this talk beginning with him because I find he's a very interesting person. He's an artist based out of London who takes helicopter rides, and he goes back to his artist studio. Then he draws from memory what he saw on that helicopter ride. He has a permanent gallery in London, and he's also someone who is autistic. And I like to bring this up because I think for a lot of able-bodied people, they think of disability as, oh, it's going to hold them back, they're suffering so much. Whereas disability in reality is much more complex. It sometimes informs your life in negative ways, but sometimes positive ways. And it's not, this disability in Stephen's case is not holding him back. It's what's making him thrive. It's what's allowing him to draw these amazing pictures. So I like you to just kind of keep that in mind as we make our way through the deck, that don't think of disability as something so negative. Think of disability as an aspect of an individual's life, whether that be positive or negative. All right, so here's our learning objectives today. By the end of this training, you should be able to explain why accessibility is important. You're going to describe what accessibility is. What is the technical definition of accessibility? What are the standards around accessibility? You're going to describe what a screen reader is and how it works for low vision and blind users, how they use a web page. We're going to define the laws around digital accessibility. There's the ADA, there's the 508 and 504. So I'll describe to you some of the laws that are important for you to keep in mind as you design and develop at UCLA. And then Chris is going to show you how you should be able to use the WYSIWYG editor in the new DGSOM web platform with accessibility in mind. So there's some things that you should think about, whether you're a high-level developer or you're a front-end editor, you're just making a change to a title, possibly. There's certain things that you should always keep in mind as you develop content for the web. And some of the things that Chris is going to walk you through is accessible links, accessible images, accessible headers, and accessible tables. She might go into a few other topics, but this is our agenda today for our learning objectives. So who we are, as I said earlier, we are the UCLA Disabilities and Computing program. My name is Travis Lee. I am the coordinator here. And here is a picture of me in 1986 at the end of my kindergarten year, graduating from kindergarten as kids do. And it was about a year after this picture was taken that my first grade teacher had talked to my mom and said that I was going to be held back into first grade because there are certain reading competencies and letter recognition that you need to move on into the second grade. And I just was not hitting those marks. And I was struggling a lot with reading. And it was very common. About 1 in about 10 people are on the spectrum of dyslexia. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle, maybe. And then what I was just really struggling with reading and writing. So my mom did what most parents, or Asian parents especially, do when they find out their son is learning disabled, is they don't know how to handle it, right? She encouraged the school to push me forward in grade, and I struggled a lot with reading. And I think about a reading exercise that was very common in elementary school, which is you have to read a paragraph out of a book, and each student has to take a paragraph. And I could still feel the anxiety rising in me when I think about having to do that. Even today, I still struggle with reading publicly. And when my name would come up, I would stammer through that paragraph and there would be laughing in the back of the room. So in those moments, I remember feeling humiliated and feeling that I didn't belong. And that's what so many students with disabilities face in the traditional classroom environments. They feel humiliated, they feel like they don't belong there. And oftentimes, by the time the college, a lot of them have dropped out. Or like most dyslexics do not go on to college. You know, although there are accommodations and program and coaching, a lot of them just quit because they do not feel like they belong in education. And that's something that I've taken with me in my career, is that I really want to help people who have disabilities be successful in education. And one of the ways you do that is through accessible design. So I'm going to pass it off to Sal, who's going to talk to you about what he does, and then we'll hear from our other presenters.
Hi, my name is Sal Santa Ana, Web Accessibility Specialist here at the DCP. A little bit about myself. I have low vision, so that means I use a screen magnifier and screen reader when I use my computer. So further on in the presentation, during my screen reader demonstration, I'll need to turn off my camera because my screen magnifier and screen reader don't play well with Zoom. So with that, I will pass it off to Chris.
Hello, my name is Chris Patterson. I am the technical lead for the Disabilities Computing Program, as well as for OARC's web team. Mostly I'm a web developer, and I focus a lot on accessibility. So yeah.
Yeah, and then so Carol Ann, and you're going to take the next section too. So you go ahead and do the screen share.
All righty, I will screen share. Just one moment. Can I get a thumbs up if that's working now?
Looks good.
Thank you. Awesome. So hi all, I'm Caroline Link. I'm the project manager with the DCP. I also identify as a person with disabilities. I'm a wheelchair user and have a congenital mobility disability. And so I'm going to start off our talk with a little bit of a discussion, or I guess one-sided discussion in this case, since we're remote and some of you are not, around the culture of disability, just to build an idea of understanding the people that accessibility serves. So I started off with this rhetorical question: what does disability mean to you? So think about it in terms of what comes to mind. Is it a person you know? Is it an image? Is it a feeling? And a lot of people have a wide variety of responses and initial thoughts to that question. Often people think about this symbol in the center. We see it everywhere in life. We see it on ramps, we see it on parking spots, we see it on elevators. It is what has been ingrained in us by society to represent the disabled community in points of access. However, there have been many complaints about this particular logo being used for disability as a whole, and one of them is the fact that it looks very sedentary. And so some countries have pushed it towards this bottom left image, which is a more active looking wheelchair user. But even more at the crux of the problem is the fact that disability isn't just people in wheelchairs. Of course, with that thought, we are thinking very limitedly about what disability represents. So in some spaces, we have multi-symbols such as this one, which can represent neurodiverse populations, those with communication disabilities and are hard of hearing or deaf, those with visual impairments, and even with this multi-symbol, it's not covering and representing everyone. So the important point to reflect on here is, what are the associations you're making in your own head, and how can you maybe broaden them to make beyond what you see as just wheelchair users or just a specific image or thought about the word disability and what it represents to you. Broadening on that, I like to think about the idea of these three pictures. So on the bottom here, we have someone, Urkel specifically, wearing glasses and representation of common food allergies. These two are both medical conditions that affect everyday life, but however, they're seen very differently than a wheelchair user, which is also usually a medical condition that affects your everyday life. And why is that? It's because the bottom two medical conditions have been normalized. When you meet someone with a food allergy or who wears glasses, most people's initial thought isn't, oh, that's a disability. Oh, that person is disabled. But if you see someone out and about in a wheelchair, that connection usually is automatically made. And again, it's just the difference is the normalization between these different needs. It is quite simple and quite common for someone to go to the optometrist and get glasses, and it is not seen as different at all. It's seen as very commonplace. However, someone has to go to the doctor and get fitted for a wheelchair and use that in their everyday lives. It is quite ostracizing often. So it's important to reflect on these barriers that exist and whether or not they are true barriers or if they have been constructed by social barriers, by the way society has been built, by even just how we're treating people. And it's important to think about that. Next, I will bring it out a little bit and the two ways that media is subliminally messaging around disability. So they use two extremes. The first one being icons of tragedy. You see pictures like this. This is a boy named Sam at 17 years old. He broke his neck while bike riding with a friend. He was wearing a helmet, however, but he fell and he broke his neck and he became quadriplegic. And so images like these are used to elicit pity, sorrow, as Travis touched on this idea of thinking about what they're missing out on, how much they're suffering. And you immediately think about disabled population as a second-class citizen, a lesser quality of life. And so the media constantly uses this to elicit these extreme responses. But this is how we're conditioned to think when we see them. On the opposite extreme, we have pictures like this. This is Sam, about 5 years after his accident, now representing his country in wheelchair sports as a professional wheelchair racer. And here he is at a Paralympics and a World Championship. And these images are used to elicit a response of pride, of inspiration. And in the same way, both of these types of photos and media are used to elicit these strong responses of overcoming or dealing with disability, to separate a person from their disability. As opposed to treating the disability as part of a person, it's seen as an obstacle to be dealt with, either with pity or with this overcoming inspirational lens. So it's important to remember that that is not a positive way to look at disability. Disability, as Travis mentioned with Stephen Wiltshire, is just a piece of their identity, a piece of their life. And they do not view it in the extremes that the media tries to push it towards. And so it's important to remember that disabled people are just people. They're not just these extremes of what the media shows. They have families, they have friends, they go out and do things, myself included. And we have to remember that they are just people like everyone else and deserve that same respect and that same understanding and compassion. So beyond the individual experience, I want to quickly talk about disability culture and the gaps between able-bodied and disabled culture. And normally I would ask the audience if someone recognizes him, but I do not know if we have audio on the other end of this. So I will pause for a sec just to see if anyone in the Zoom chat wants to answer. But if not, I will continue. All right, I'll continue and answer my own question. But this is Michael Phelps. And he is famous for being an extremely accomplished American swimmer. He has a total of 28 Olympic medals over 5 Olympic Games. And you see him super commonplace in a lot of places now. I've seen him on advertisements. I've seen him on cereal boxes. He has become a household name over his time in his Olympic career, his professional swimming career. However, I then ask the crowd, does anyone recognize this individual? And I'll take another pause just to see. Often there's no response, so I'll do a shorter pause for that one. But this is Trisha Zorn, and she is a blind American swimmer, and she has 55 medals over 7 games and even overlapped years with Michael Phelps. 55 medals is one short of twice the number Michael Phelps has. However, she is not a household name, and she is widely celebrated within the disabled population, but not within the able-bodied population. It shows that these two existences, these two cultures, parallel each other, but do not tend to intertwine, and there's this ignorance between the two of the celebration of culture. So it's important to understand and even seek out this information, because of course you don't know what you don't know. I also like to note in this piece, because it was brought up at one point in a previous presentation, that since retiring from his swimming career, Michael Phelps has said that he has ADHD and mental health conditions, but he has yet to specifically identify as a disabled individual. So I also like to throw that note in because it has been brought up as a point of discussion. So some things to remember is, one, disabled people are just people. We live lives, we experience the world, we have friends. We're not just these extreme images of sorrow and pity or inspiration. We're whole people. Disability culture is very rich, impactful, diverse. Go out and look around and look for disabled icons, maybe in spaces you wouldn't expect them, because there are some amazing stories out there that are worth sharing with your friends and the general population. So understanding both the individual experiences and collective culture are the first steps to really embracing the disabled demographic and understanding how to treat us with compassion and respect. And this may seem a little out of place in a digital accessibility web launch talk, but it really isn't. It's how we ensure that our communities in person and online at UCLA are welcoming and inclusive spaces for everyone. I'll hand it back to Travis to talk about the what of accessibility.
All right, thanks, Caroline. All right, I'm going to move into the what of accessibility now. So when people ask me what is accessibility, I like to show them this very simple diagram, which is what accessibility is. And on one side, you have an end user. The end user may have a disability. And in this case, the responsibility of the disabled person when it comes to accessibility is finding the right assistive technology that allows them to access web-based content or digital content. In this case, this individual with a disability has some technology that she has. She has a facial mouse called a JAWS, which is a chin mouse. She has a puff and suck switch, which simulates a left and right click using a puff of air or a suck of air. And this technology can get kind of expensive, but most of the students and people who are at UCLA have already found the assistive technology that they need to access their material. In some cases they don't, and they could go to CAE, and CAE has grants that they can actually purchase some of this equipment. Sal's going to show you an open source version of a screen reader, but screen readers can cost anywhere between $0 to like $500–600 if you have a nice one. But this technology works pretty good. On the other side, you have the developer, and in this case, with developer eating pizza, as we do. The developer, this is any of us. The developer is not just the developer. I look at this person as the content editor, the designer, the person who's uploading a PDF to the internet. That is the person whose responsibility is to remove the obstacles from allowing her technology from working. That's what accessibility is. Accessibility on the side of the disabled person is getting the right technology. Accessibility for everyone else, like us, is designing and developing in such a way that removes the obstacles from her technology, from her assistive technology. In some cases, it's pretty easy. You want to think about, alt tagging an image, to make sure that a blind person can see it, putting a caption file along with your video to make sure a deaf person can be able to understand the video. Sometimes it's more complicated, like you might have a menu that it may not fly out correctly. But in general, we want to show you the simple way to get to digital accessibility using the editor today. But we definitely have more complex classes on accessible PDFs, for example. But for today's class, we're really just focusing on the basic level editor within the WYSIWYG environment, within your environment, and looking at ways to remove those obstacles and enhance the user experience of a disabled person. All right. That's what accessibility is. Accessibility is a relationship between you and the end user, and your job is to remove the obstacles. Okay. So at the DCP, we offer some services for the entire campus. If you guys are interested in reaching out to us, we do website consultation. If you're building a new website, we do website testing. We have a testing team. We actually have Sal as well as another tester. We do mobile app testing, purchasing evaluation. If you're looking for a new software environment and you want to send it over to the DCP before you send it over to purchasing to make sure that's going to pass accessibility, we could do that for you. We have a new course being developed in the LMS. We consult with you on the best practices there. We have document accessibility testing, digital accessibility training. We also offer a site improves tool. I know DGSOM is right now not offering this, but if you're outside of DGSOM, please reach out about the site improve tool. And we also have a accessible WordPress theme. I know you guys are in a Drupal environment now. Okay, so here are the laws and guidances around digital accessibility. This is very important, even though I don't think this is the reason why people change their development or design behaviors. This is important to us as an institution at UCLA, because once in a while, there will be a legal complaint against the digital accessibility of our web environments. And those complaints could become very serious in which, like, some universities will have to pay out millions of dollars. UCLA has been very fortunate to not go that far, but we've faced legal issues around digital accessibility. So understand that not only is it your responsibility to be inclusive for people with disabilities, it's also you're legally obligated to make these changes. And you are protecting the university by engaging in best practices for accessibility. Okay, so the first one we have is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Think of this as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but extended to people with disabilities. Here we see George Herbert Walker Bush with Justin Whitlock Dart. These are two Republicans from Texas signing a huge piece of civil rights legislation. So it kind of shows you where we were and where we are now. Excuse me. We also have the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We're actually about to have our 50-year anniversary of this law. And within this act, there are two sections, Section 508 and Section 504. Section 508 says that we must have accessible IT communication, information technology. When we design and develop, if you're receiving federal funding, you should be accessible. That's what the 508 is saying. The 504 is saying that students with disabilities are entitled equal access to education, which is why we have an ADA 504 compliance officer here to make sure that that law is not being breached. We also have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is kind of the Bible for accessibility people. When we don't know if something is accessible or not, we can always go back to the WCAG. We call it the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they give you guidance. This living document will give guidance on whether or not and how to measure accessibility. What are the success criteria for accessibility? You don't need to go super deep into this unless you're going into accessibility, but just know that it's broken down to 4 major areas: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we will talk about some of the best practices in the WYSIWYG editor, but know that those best practices are backed up by a measuring stick, and that measuring stick is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's how we measure accessibility here. All right, so that's the what of accessibility. Now it's time for Sal to demonstrate how a screen reader works on a web page.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Share. You have started screen share. Test. Home UCLA Med School pin.
Let's see.
Live transcription. Closed
Okay,
captioning
can you hear my screen reader?
Share this page button.
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
Okay. So I will provide the demonstration of a screen
Participants
reader.
can now see your screen alert.
Screen readers are based on text-to-speech technology, much like Amazon Alexa and Google Home. Screen readers are primarily driven by the keyboard. For iOS and Mac, there's a screen reader called VoiceOver, which is very popular. For Android, it's called TalkBack, and for Windows, the two primary screen readers are called JAWS and NVDA. Out of those, NVDA, VoiceOver, and TalkBack are free. So like I said, screen readers are primarily driven by the keyboard unless it's driven by a touch screen. So right now I'm going to press the tab key so I could go through the links on this page.
Share this page button.
I will slow down the voice for you.
Rate 85, rate
guys.
80, rate 7, rate 65, rate 60, rate 55. Bookmark this tab button. Banner landmark University of California. Navigation landmark list with 2 items UCLA health link. Give link. Navigation landmark list with 1 items quick links visited link. Search landmark open search button.
So like I said, I'm just tabbing through the links. I won't go through all of them, just a few more.
Site logo link to home graphic visited link home. Navigation landmark list with 6 items education link. List with 6 items pre-health opportunities link.
So descriptive links are very important, as Chris will show you later. Links provide screen reader users like myself the destination of what the link is, where the link is going or what it's going to do. I could also pull up a list of links.
Elements list dialog. MD Education 9 of 213 level 0.
Let's see. List of links. So please keep in mind to keep your links descriptive. So just imagine if I had a list of 10 read more links, I would actually have to click on each one of them to see where they are going. And it doesn't give me any information of what it does or where the destination is.
Home UCLA.
The next important thing on a web page for screen reader users is heading structure.
Main landmark 70 years of trailblazing.
Let's see.
See yourself here.
Let's see, I'm going to try to close that menu.
Headlines heading level 2.
I'm pressing the H key on my
Live your
keyboard.
life of impact here heading level 4.
I'm going to try to jump up to the heading level
70
1.
years of trailblazing. Heading level 1. See yourself here. Visited link heading level 2.
So heading structure is very important. It represents kind of like a when you see a newspaper, you could jump in between the articles just by looking at the page title or the titles of the various articles on the page.
Headlines heading level 2. Live your life of impact here heading level 4.
So it gives me a way to navigate up and down on the page.
Elements list.
I could also
Dialogue.
pull up
Type.
a list of the
Grouping.
headings on the page.
Headings radio button pressed not checked. Quick links 3 of 5 level 0. Main navigation 4 of 5 level 0. 70 years of trailblazing.
So
Expanded 5
I could jump directly to this article if I want.
Home use 70 years of trailblazing. Heading level 1. Link learn more. Link virtual tours. Link visit campus.
So the next item I'd like to go over is alt text for graphics. Screen readers could pull those out and read them to me.
Home test 2 graphic.
Oh, that graphic doesn't have a good alt
Dr.
text. but-
Hagen Tablian is a UCLA health emergency surgeon and the inaugural fellow in UCLA's space medicine program. Placeholder image graphic link. Created by DALL-E graphic link.
So
Placeholder image graphic link.
please keep in mind to add descriptive alt text to your images so I know what the images
Created
are.
by DALL-E graphic. No photo description available. 416 likes. 1 comment. 70 years of trailblazing. Home test 2 graphic. 70 years of trail.
And the last feature I'd like to show you is the screen reader could read the page.
Heading level 1 70 years of trailblazing. Link learn more. Link virtual tours. Link visit campus. Link UCLA. Link programs. Graphic home test 2. Heading level 2 visited link see yourself here.
So that wraps it up. So keep in mind that descriptive links, heading structure, and image alt text are the 3 most important elements on the page for screen reader users. So with all that, I will pass it off to Travis.
All right, so this second half of the program, Chris is going to walk you through the best uses of the WYSIWYG environment. So go ahead, take it away, Chris.
All righty, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about how to do accessibility in your editing environment. And this is what I'm going to cover using headings, alt text in the images, link text, tables, emphasis, and being cautious with colors. So headings, as Sal just showed you, headings are a way for him to navigate a web page. And actually, according to the screen reader survey that WebAIM puts out each year, that is the number one way, the first thing that users with screen readers do when they encounter a web page. They pull up that list of headings and say, okay, what do I want to look at? Much the same way as if you opened a newspaper front page and said, do I want to read any of these articles? You're going to look at the headlines before you decide to dig in and start reading. So when using headings, number one, use them. We often find people will have pages that have no headings on them. That's a problem. So number one, use them. Use the outlines, use the headings as like an outline when you're writing. If you were writing an essay in high school, flashback, you would outline as, you know, bulleted items where the top level is a certain level, and then subpoints under that are different levels. So an H1, there should be one H1 per page. It should be the unique title for the entire page, headline for the page, not the site title. And then a heading underneath that would be an H2 at that next level. And then if that H2 section of the page is broken out into some smaller chunks, those would each get an H3, right? So it's a tree essentially. So that's how the outlines work, or how the headings work. How you apply them, in your WYSIWYG editor, you have a format drop down on the toolbar that gives you access to heading 2, heading 3, all the way to heading 6. The heading 1 is automatically applied for you based on the page title, and there should be only one per page. So that's why you don't have a heading 1 in this drop down. But definitely use those headings 2, the 3. I rarely find the need to get down to level 5 and 6, but they're there if you need them. So that's headings. Also, with headings, do not use headings to create white space or leave them empty, and do not skip levels. So do not go for, you know, you've got a heading 2 and underneath that you put a heading 5. You want to have that 3 and 4 between them. So you want to use them structurally, semantically, and not just as design. All right. So alt text for images. When you're thinking about an image, if you can't see the image, what do you want to know about that image? That's kind of the point here. What is the content of the image, or what is the function of the image? If it's, and the alt text is supposed to provide that for you. If you can't see the image, whether that, I mean, and that's primarily for people using screen readers, but it might also be for people that can't get the images on their device or whatever. It's not downloading properly or something. It will show them the alt text until the image loads. So that's important. It's also good for SEO, by the way, just extra. So good alt text should describe the content or function of the image. It should be brief. There's not a hard and fast rule. It's not in the WCAG, a specific number of characters. We just think that 100 characters is a good rule of thumb. If you go to 103, that's probably fine. But keep it brief. If you've got a diagram that's really complex that you need to describe, you're not going to be able to do that in a brief way, but you still need to do it. So you want to do that in the text of the page, and then in the alt text, say that description is in the text of the page. If the image is strictly decorative, then you use the empty string for the alt text. Don't leave out the alt attribute, use it, but have it empty. I'm not sure exactly how that's applied on your site. I'll let one of your technical folks decide that. Any image that is linked, there's a link. If it has just the image inside that link and no additional content or text, that image cannot have an empty alt text. It has to have actual alt text. A link must have a description of where you're going. And avoid using images of text. That's actually a level A criteria in the WCAG, is to not use images of text unless it's essential. And what is essential is up for description. All right, so link text. We want to make sure that, as Sal showed you earlier, the link text is informative so that when he pulls up that list of links, he doesn't get read more, click here, read more, click here. So you want your link text to explain what the user is going to find at the other end if they follow that link. You want to provide information when that link text is read out of context. You do not want to use URLs as link text normally. There are exceptions. If you're trying to put a link to medschool.ucla.edu, that's fine. It's just the domain name, that's all right. If you've got the whole path to a particular page, don't use that as your link text. Do not use generic or non-descriptive link text, such as everything in the list on the right. You can use those words if it's part of a longer link, at least some of them, but don't use them alone. So not read more by itself. And click here in particular is one that annoys everyone, so don't use that. All right, so tables. If you've got tabular data, it is important to use tables. If you do not have tabular data, you should not be using tables for layout. If that makes sense, like use them when it is the right kind of information. If it's tabular information, it should be in a table, but not if it's just you want it aligned left and right, right? That's not the reason to use tables. And then when you use tables, it's critical to use the table headers. That's kind of the most important thing about tables, is to use the headers. So on where it says here, the first row will appear as a table header. That's automatically done for you. Use that. Where it says, leave the first row blank if you do not need a header. If you do not need a header, you do not need a table. Don't use the table. That's kind of the rule there. Using the table caption is also good. That helps. And then keep tables simple, because the more complex they get, if you have 2 levels of headings or 2 levels of column headings, that bit gets really complex, and it's a lot harder for a screen reader to follow a complex table. So keep them simple, like 1 row that is the headings, or 1 column that is the headings is fine, is good. Then I have got emphasis. So to emphasize text, you want to use the strong and EM tags. Those are automatically applied when you use the bold or the italic icons on the toolbar. So italic icon, it visually shows it as italic, but what that is putting on there is the EM tag, which stands for emphasis. The B toolbar puts on the strong tag, which is strong emphasis. Those are semantic tags. Those are important for screen readers and SEO to know that those items are emphasized. So don't use underline for emphasis. Underline should only be used on links, because users get really confused if something is underlined and they want to try to click on it and it's not a link. That's a problem. And don't use color alone for emphasis either. So with and I know in your environment, in your WYSIWYG editor, you don't have access to color. That's a good thing. If you're using, color somewhere else, not in your WYSIWYG editor, keep these things in mind. Color must meet the WCAG contrast ratios, which is 4.5 to 1 for normal size text compared to the background color, and 3.1, 3 to 1 for linked text compared to surrounding unlinked text if that link is not underlined. So those are, and it's really important if you're creating, a flyer or, whatever it is, an email, to keep in mind your contrast ratios, right? Because that's going to make a difference. If you've got a red button and a green button, and you're trying to explain to a user how to do something, and you're saying, well, click on the green button to do this. If that user has color blindness, if they have a specific kind of color blindness that makes it difficult to distinguish between red and green, they're not going to know which button is the red one, which one's the green one, unless you give them some other way to differentiate between those. If you're driving and you have color blindness with red and green specific color blindness, how do you know between which way, when you're supposed to go, when you're supposed to stop? That's probably whether it's the top light or the bottom light that's on. So you want to use more than color alone to describe things. Thanks. That's my section. I think we'll go back to questions now.
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks, Chris. So Chris really walked you through the basics of the WYSIWYG editor environment. If you would like, more deeper knowledge, keep an eye out for any training opportunities on our website. And I'm going to bring back to here. All right. So in conclusion, so today you learned about why accessibility is important. Caroline talked to you about the culture of disability and how different oftentimes, how little overlap there is between oftentimes with the able-bodied community and the disabled community, and as well as that people with disabilities, they do have certain needs that need to be met. And a lot of these needs are met through the digital environment. For example, I was speaking to a young blind person recently, and they're saying they do everything on the iPhone, for example. So technology is getting better. Accessibility in the native, in the frameworks in which we build is getting better. For example, the DGSOM Drupal environment, they're trying to reduce the ability to make mistakes. And I really do think that that is key moving forward. I don't think that the future of accessibility is everyone having to make every single small change. I'm hoping that accessible templates are going to be used more often, accessible frameworks, accessible mobile apps that are designed for accessibility from the beginning is ideal. It's very much more difficult to go back in time and fix things. We learned about what accessibility is. Accessibility is the relationship between you and the end user, and your job is to remove those obstacles. We saw a screen reader. So a screen reader is one of the things that we often think about when we think about digital accessibility. I remember in 2012, the first time I saw someone use a screen reader on a course I was designing, and I was shocked at how badly I had done in terms of course design or accessibility. And it was around that time I decided to really devote my career to understanding digital accessibility and the needs of the disabled community in digital spaces. We defined the laws around accessibility. We learned about the ADA, which is the umbrella law for digital accessibility, or just accessibility for people with disabilities in general. And more specifically, the 508 and the WCAG are really the success that we're looking for in our space, which is digital environments. We got to see how Chris described how to use the WYSIWYG environment. You guys have a brand new Drupal environment that you guys are going to be using. And I know you guys have reduced the ability to use different colors, you use mainly black text, but there's still going to be opportunities for you to make mistakes. So I do think that links is one that I see very often, like read more, click here. That used to be really normal in the early web. We're really trying to unlearn that practice and try to teach people to use descriptive linking. I think that's really important. We talked about the use of alt text on every image. Anytime you use an image in your website or in an article, even in a document, like a Word document or PDF, there should ideally also be an alt text available, just in case someone who's low vision or blind hits that image. We talked about headers. Chris talked about using the headers. You're often going to normally have one H1 for every web page, and you're going to see mainly H2s in that editor. So use your H2s for the most part, but it needs to be in a hierarchy. H2 is followed by H3, H4 is H3s. So in that order, H1, H2, H3, and so on. So that is one of the most important ways that someone with a disability might navigate the web page. We also learned about tables. I remember in the old web, we often use tables for layout and how to formatting a web page. Really today, we want to encourage people to only use tables for tabular data. So this is the main takeaways from today's lesson. And here we see Helen Keller. She was someone who has these amazing quotes. She was also the first college graduate who was both blind and deaf. She had a lot of doubters, obviously, in her life. Back in the old days, there was even more discrimination against people with disabilities. And I think about this when I think about taking on this responsibility at the DCP when I was in my mid 30s and looking for a career change. And I was in the instructional side of, I was mainly working on online courses. I was an instructional designer for most of my career, but I wanted to use those skills to actually improve online education for people with disabilities. And so I moved into the accessibility world, which is kind of a compliance role. But I remember my old predecessor here, his name was Patrick Burke, and I remember talking to him, talking to a lot of other people who are in the accessibility field, and they all told me the same thing about digital accessibility, that nobody cares, nobody's listening. And Travis, you're gonna get your heart broke because you care too much about this type of stuff and nobody else does. And I thought about that and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this job anyway and kind of see how it goes. And in my experience here at UCLA, I saw a different side of digital accessibility and the developer community where people were ready to learn this stuff and were ready to actually use technology to improve equity and inclusion for people. Oftentimes in the technology and development world, we're very much siloed. We're like, okay, we're technologists, we're STEM people, yet there is an overlap when it comes to being inclusive. And that overlap is through digital accessibility. How do we design digital environments that are inclusive for people with disabilities? And all those people who told me, in the past that nobody cares and nobody listens, I'm starting to see that they were wrong and people actually do care, especially UCLA. UCLA is doing a very good job at trying to make this university a more inclusive place. So while this is what Helen Keller said to her doubters, while they were saying among themselves it cannot be done, it was done. And I believe that for UCLA, this is also true, that this is a huge task in front of us, but I know it's possible. We are one of the #1 universities in the world. And I know that we could do better when it comes to digital accessibility and inclusion. And we are making those steps right now. And it takes every individual to make a small change in their design practices, to use your headers, to put the alt text in, to think about how you design a web page that is not just for speed, but actually for maximum inclusion. All right, so if you're interested in learning more about the DCP, we have an Instagram channel at UCLA DCP. That's probably where we're most active. Facebook, I know, is dying, but I think we still have the Facebook. But I think we're most active on the UCLA DCP. You'll see events. You'll learn about disability-related issues at UCLA, and I highly encourage you to check it out. And we're going to hang out now for 5-10 minutes to answer any questions that you might have about digital accessibility. Thank you so much.
When creating a hyperlink, is it more or less accessible to have it open in a new tab?
Chris.
So if you open in a new tab, that is acceptable. However, you're supposed to let the user know that you're opening it in a new tab. So what we usually do is if we use the target equals blank, we also include some non-visual text within the link that says opening in a new window or a new tab. So that's how we deal with that. So if you're going to open in a new window, let the user know that you're opening in a new window in the link text.
Okay, I have another question. There's the disability button with the that did you see on different websites that allows you to have a contrast of colors and black and white and those things. I've heard that those actually hinder usability, accessibility. Is it true?
Yeah, so those are oftentimes shortcuts. I've seen them use, like, I've been to like the Subaru website, I've been to a few websites where I noticed this accessibility button, and it's within UCLA, it is our recommendation that you do not use that. Although I have seen it being used. The ideal situation is you design and develop from the very beginning of the process, like DGSOM is. You guys have a brand new website, you brought in the DCP, you're trying your best to birth this website accessibly. And oftentimes I think those features are mainly used to try to remediate on the fly an inaccessible environment. So the ideal situation, build accessibility within your code base, within the HTML, within the WYSIWYG editor. You won't need to use any of those shortcuts. And like you said, I will reiterate that oftentimes they do cause more issues than they solve. That I've heard that from a number of disabled users on that.
Just as an example, when we hosted UC Tech a couple of years ago, I'm the ambassador for UCLA. So as we were working on that, we were looking for an accessible environment, online event environment to host in, and none of them were perfect. We ended up with a tool called vFairs because UCLA Events had experience in using it. And they had an accessibility widget in there that provided a few functions. I had Sal test it, and between Sal and I, we decided this isn't adding anything. It's not improving any of the situations that were shortcomings. So I just had them turn it off.
Yeah, I can read it out loud. It says, is it appropriate to use an H2 tag after an H3 tag when the content falls into a different topic, although related topic?
So the way that works is you've got your H1 is the page title, right? So then each, say you've got, 3 paragraphs, they're all, different topics. Those would all be headed with a heading of H2, right? If one of those H2 is then broken out into 3 subpoints, in smaller paragraphs or subparagraphs under those would each be H3s. So that's what it's an outline. You've got, so the H1 is the top level, the H2 is the A character underneath that, the H3 is the I subpoint, right? Are you following what I'm saying? It's like, it's not point 1 is H1, point 2 is H2, point 3 is H3. It's the subpoints are at the lower levels. H2 is under H3, H3 or under H1, H3 is under H2 as a subpoint.
Right. And so Scott, yeah, you go ahead and use an H2 after an H3 if you're kind of switching topics back to a H2 level paragraph or topic, because it wouldn't make sense to continue with an H3. You're switching to a new topic, so you're going to go back to H2 in that case. So yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, DGSOM, for the opportunity to speak to you today about web accessibility. I think that you guys are doing a really good job with your new website. So just keep it up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the DCP around, design or development questions around when it comes to digital accessibility and disability inclusion. All right. Thank you so much.